Today, we are privileged and delighted to host 4 very special speakers. 4 women that are representing their countries, serving their countries at the highest level of the diplomatic hierarchy. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Kate Smith, Ambassador of the United Kingdom, Ms. Charlotte Family, Ambassador of India, Ms. Salman Jan, Ambassador of India, and Ms. Kate Logan, Ambassador of Australia to Greece. Your Excellencies, your Ambassadors, thank you for accepting our invitation. I take also the opportunity to welcome 2 more ambassadors we have with us today. The Ambassador of Montenegro, Anna Vukadinovic, and the new Ambassador to Greece of Canada, Mr. Mark Allen. Thank you. And I want to also welcome all the representatives from the American Embassy, the Norwegian Embassy, and the other embassies that are with us today. Today's event is organized in collaboration with Women Act, and I will shortly give the floor to the representative of Women Act, Maria Iannou, to present their organization. Before I do that, I want to briefly say a few words about the Institute of Global Affairs. This is an institute, a center of scholarship in local and international affairs, established at ACG back in 2008. Throughout the years, we have hosted numerous events with the participation of high-level opinion leaders coming from different backgrounds and cultures and countries, always aiming at enhancing and open the understanding of very often complex international or local issues, and promoting an open and sincere dialogue. The Institute of Global Affairs operates at the American College of Greece under the auspices of the Office of Public Affairs, and its director, Dr. Vlavianos, who will be the moderator today, has the support of an academic advisory board comprising 6 more Deree faculty members. Namely, these are the Dean of our School of Liberal Arts and Science, Dr. Elena Maragou. I think most of them, if not all of them, are here today. And our professors, Dr. Ioanna Paxiotti, Dr. Ilias Iliopoulos, Dr. Konstantinos Papadopoulos, Dr. Anna Visvisi, and Dr. George Philis. These are the members of our academic board of the Institute of Global Affairs. As of this semester, we are very happy because the Institute aims at enhancing and strengthening the scope of our newly launched program in international relations and European affairs. This is an undergraduate program which started this semester, already doing very well, enrolling more and more students, doing either a full major or a minor in this program. And we hope that the Institute, through the targeted events and activities, will be an additional source of knowledge and inspirations, not only to our students majoring in this program, but also to everybody who's interested in the topics that we discuss. So, on the occasion of the particular topic that we will be discussing today, I just want to highlight that many women have served the American College of Greece from positions of leadership. Today, the President's Cabinet, the top administration of the college, consists of an equal number of men and women, equally dynamic, if I may say, men and women, not to mention that all 6 Deree deans are women, as the Provost mentioned yesterday very correctly. So, as our President can testify, ACG knows well of women in leadership, and on that note, I would like to invite the President of the American College of Greece, Dr. David Horner, to tell us a little bit about the history, the rich history of and the role of women in of this institution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If I may dissent just modestly from what you just said, I think it would be commonly recognized in this community that the women who comprise the members of the President's Cabinet are substantially more dynamic than the men who serve as their colleagues. But that, if true, that is only a continuation of the historical reality of this institution, because in truth, this college owes its very existence and certainly its continuing progress to the leadership of women. My spouse, Sue, who's here today, is a scholar in the field of gender studies and religion, and one of the people that she's researched since we came to Greece is the founder of this institution, Maria West, who in 1875 went from the familiar environment of Boston to a very unfamiliar location in Smyrna to found a school for girls. So a single woman traveled all those miles, not in the comfort of air that we would make that transit today, but in considerably less comfortable circumstances with this vision of establishing an educational operation that would make a difference in society, specifically through the education of girls. Almost 50 years later, another very dramatic event occurred. This was the catastrophe of Smyrna. A book was written by a Boston University professor 3 years ago. The movie rights for this book have recently been sold, so we may see the story on the screen soon. But in that book, the professor makes the claim that the great catastrophe, the fire of Smyrna, was actually set at our school. And we know from the historical records that the military personnel that went in to help evacuate the school, and specifically to carry away the American educators, the then principal of the school, Minnie Mills, refused to leave if she could not take the children with her. And so these acts of vision of the founder, of courage, of the principal of the school, Minnie Mills, are a part of the legend and the historical origins of this institution. But it's not just that history. As Claudia points out, women continue to serve with great distinction. The majority of our students, although we are no longer a school for girls, the majority of our students are girls or women. The majority of our faculty are women. Our Board of Trustees is not yet quite 50-50 men and women. We're moving towards that target. But the chair of our board, Dr. Conchetta Stewart, is a woman. That's who I report to. So we are grateful historically and currently for the contributions of women, and we are grateful for this opportunity to engage the story of these very distinguished women, ambassadors, who can help focus our attention on the contributions of women in our society. So thank you all for being here and for continuing this story of the American College of Greece. Thank you very much.
I'd like to invite Maria Deniu to present Women Act.
Thank you, Claudia. Hi, everyone. When I was a young girl, I witnessed an event that would change my life. I remember I was at the audience of my school's running competition. And I remember seeing all the kids waiting at the starting line for the signal to go off. And then the signal goes off and all the kids start running. And then I turn my head and I see this young, fragile girl. She had been pushed over. She had fell down on the ground, tears falling from her eyes. So there was a silence at the audience. And then suddenly she stands up and she starts running. And I was astonished. And then a couple of minutes later, she falls down again. So the crowd starts cheering and clapping their hands and shouting and encouraging her to move on. So she stands up. She wipes off the tears from her eyes and she starts running all the way to the finish line. So this event marked my life because at that moment I realized that if you want to succeed, if you want to be a leader, you have to be both persistent and encouraged. So Women Act was created exactly for that, to encourage all those women to persist in pursuing leadership positions in their professional fields. And we are very proud here today that we have with us four amazing women with formidable careers and stories to share, and I am sure that they will inspire you the way they have inspired us. Thank you.
Well, after all these introductory remarks, I don't think I have to add anything more. I'm glad that the President said that the men in the college are in the minority, so I'm speaking as a representative of the minority. And I'm very happy that together with Claudia and the other members of the Institute, we organized this wonderful event. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to invite Every time an ambassador is going to speak, I will invite the student to say a few words. So the first ambassador to speak is going to be Miss Kate Smith, the British ambassador, Ambassador in the Kingdom. So I would like Nicholas Vlavianos to come and do the presentation. And perhaps I should add, say a few words about him. He's a senior student at the Athens Law School and a parallel student in the Stavros Niarchos Scholar of Deree, where he's doing a minor in international business.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vlavianos, Dr. Vlavianos. Her Excellency Mrs. Kate Smith has been Her Majesty's Ambassador to the Hellenic Republic since January 2017. She joined the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in 1987 and took up her first diplomatic post overseas in Athens in 1991, serving as Second Secretary Political and Press Attaché. She returned to London in 1994 to the Non-Proliferation Department of the FCO, focusing on chemical and biological weapons. Later, she served at the United Nations in New York at the Security Council and in a number of roles in London relating to defense and security issues, including the aftermath of the 2003 war in Iraq. Mrs. Smith became Deputy Head of Mission at the British Embassy in Tehran from 2005 to 2007 and was appointed as a Companion of the Order of St. Michael and St. George in Her Majesty the Queen's New Year Honours for 2008. On return from Tehran, she was seconded to the Royal Dutch Show as an international advisor from 2008, subsequently joining the company as head of the United Kingdom Governmental Relations from 2009 until 2012. On returning to the FCO in 2012, she served as Director Americas until 2016. Mrs. Smith grew up in Croydon, South London, and was educated at Oxford University, graduating in philosophy, politics, and economics in 1986. Your Excellency, welcome to the ACG. Καλώς ήρθατε.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you to the American College of Greece, to Women Act, and to the Institute for Global Leadership for the opportunity to participate in this really important event today. Actually, for me, this year has been punctuated by events about women in leadership, and it's very nice that we're coming to the end of the year with the third one. The first, actually, I was very honoured to speak together with Ambassador Samalin at the Kinal inaugural conference at an event on women and political participation. And then in June, at our big annual summer reception, what we call the Queen's Birthday Party, we celebrated the 100 years of women's suffrage in the United Kingdom, when most women aged 30 and over won the right to vote in parliamentary elections for the first time, and with it a say in the making of the laws of the land and the governance of the country. Now, of course, I'm speaking today not as a woman in politics, but in public life. Especially in this job, which I have to say is the most public-facing work I have ever done. You heard the facts of my career, but I'm going to pinpoint just a couple of them that I think are relevant to our theme today. So when I went to university, as you heard, in 1983, before most of you were born, I applied to a college which 3 years before had been all male. Only took male students. And it was one of a group of Oxford colleges which, at that period, went co-ed. So when I entered into that college body, the ratio of men to women was about 4 to 1. It's now more like 50-50. When I joined the Foreign Office a few years later, the admission of women, similarly, was not an issue at all. But it's really worth noting that the first married woman ambassador was only appointed in that same year. First time a married woman had been appointed ambassador by the United Kingdom government was in 1987. And in fact, it was only in 1972 that the Foreign Office abolished its requirement on women diplomats to resign if they got married. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable fact. 72 that lasted to. And there was an internal report done about the Foreign Office just a few years before by an extremely eminent public servant, Lord Plowden, who made the following comment on this. This was before the abolition. He said, "We doubt whether it will often happen that a woman will wish to remain in the diplomatic service after marriage." Well, you should have a look at where we are today, because now there are around 60 women, heads of mission, heads of post, many of them married with children. I have the great honour to be one of them, not married with children in my case, but the first British woman ambassador in Greece. And about 30% of our senior roles across the Foreign Office and diplomatic service are now filled by women. That's good, but it should be better, because it should be 50. Well, I personally feel very privileged and very lucky to have got as far as I have in my profession. It's an extraordinary job being an ambassador, because you don't just represent your government, you represent your country and your people. Quite a privilege and quite a responsibility. And I want to say to you today that I have never, in all sincerity in my career, encountered any discrimination or any gender-based barriers or challenges. For example, just one other fact from my career. When I was appointed in 2005 to be Deputy Chief of Mission in Tehran, this is a country in which women never reach the highest positions in the civil service or in government, and where they face institutional, legal, judicial and economic discrimination. No one questioned at that time, when I applied for that job, whether it was sensible to send a woman in a senior position to our embassy in Tehran. And I'm very glad I didn't, because it was a wonderful experience. And it's true that very often in my career I found myself to be the only woman in the room, or in a tiny female minority around the table, and that was certainly the case often when I worked for nearly 5 years for Shell. The oil sector is notoriously male-dominated, and that's not how it should be, and I'm glad to say it's changing. But, having said all of that, I have never felt myself intimidated or uncomfortable or discriminated as a result of being a minority or a single woman in those situations. And on the contrary, I've only encountered support and encouragement, not least from my male colleagues. Now, that all sounds very rosy, doesn't it? What is the reason for that? Well, I would put all of that down, all of that positive experience I've had, to mainly one factor, which is the strength of institutions. So let's go back to 1918. So Britain's pioneering decision in 1918 on women's suffrage rests on a long tradition in Britain of liberal democracy and values, which of course have a universal appeal. For centuries, we've respected and encouraged freedom of thought and expression. The rule of law is sacrosanct, and our laws are made, implemented, and applied within strong, independent institutions. And it's within that framework that the rights of all, those from all minorities, with differences, with different opinions, who are disadvantaged in different ways, all those rights are protected. And our institutions, in which I include actually our leading private sector companies, organisations, as well as public bodies, have developed over the centuries and decades to ensure that those values and principles are reflected and implemented in contemporary ways. So, for example, in employment practices. All of that, of course, in the framework of the law, which has gradually required equality, impartiality, merit-based selection and promotion, and non-discrimination, plus government policies, social policies that support women's participation in the workplace. And that's underpinned too by additional supportive policies that public bodies and companies decide to adopt themselves. So I would say it's this institutional development, which is a combination of legislation and policies and practices of enlightened corporate leadership and management, and of course the inspiration of individual leaders, means that women are now in leadership positions right across the United Kingdom. And the results speak for themselves. So today, in 2018, we now have our second female Prime Minister. The United Kingdom's most senior judge is a woman. The Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police is a woman. The Director of the National Crime Agency, which is a bit like the FBI, is a woman. Women serve as England's Chief Fire Officer and Chief Medical Officer. Our leading business and trade union organisations nationally are both headed by women. In the Scottish Parliament, a female First Minister debates against a female opposition leader. In the National Assembly of Wales, a woman leads the third party. The two largest parties in Northern Ireland are led by women. And of course, we have the Queen. Our head of state is also a woman. So to conclude, I do not have a story of personal struggle or triumph against discrimination or difficulty as a woman. I don't believe I've had to behave differently or work harder to get where I am than any man in a similar position. I don't think I do my job differently from a man. And I'm lucky and privileged in that, and I know it is not the case everywhere. So my key message today is that I owe a huge amount of that to the strength of the institutions that have educated me, that have employed me, and have developed me. So I think my message to you today is that one way women can really contribute to developing female leadership is not just developing themselves and being strong and brave about their own careers, but that's very important as well, but it's to work for the reform and improvement of institutions which enable that female leadership to flourish and thrive. So that message, over to you.
Okay, thank you so much. I just discovered from what you said that we were at Oxford at the same time. And you didn't tell us which college you were at, but I was at Trinity, and the year I arrived, it became a mixed college. Right. For the benefit of all the students, but to the displeasure of the porter, who had to, change his vocabulary and, welcome the girls in the college. Which college were you? Christchurch. So, now is the time of the Ambassador of Sweden, Mr. Lord Sandlin. I'm going to invite Panagiotis Patikos, a senior at the National Technical University of Athens, and a senior at the same time at Deree, where he is an academic merit scholarship majoring in finance.
Thank you very much. Her Excellency Charlotte Samuelson is serving since September 2017 as the Ambassador of Sweden to Greece. During her career at the Swedish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, she has focused on particularly European Union policies and economic issues ranging from EU foreign policy, neighbourhood accession negotiations, trade, the EU internal market and implementation of the Lisbon Treaty. Prior to arriving to Athens, she was Deputy Director General at the Department for International Trade and EU Internal Market at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Stockholm during 2015 to 2017. Before that, Ambassador Samuelson worked for 12 years in Brussels in various positions, such as advisor in the support group for Ukraine in the European Commission, foreign policy advisor to the President of the European Council, Herman van Rompuy, and in the Parliament in representation of Sweden in the EU. She has also served at the Swedish Embassy in Madrid. Before joining the Swedish Ministry for Foreign Affairs, she was a consultant at the OECD in Paris on territorial development and agriculture. Ambassador Samuelson holds a master's degree in political science, European law and economics, from the Ludwig Maximilian Universität in Munich, Germany. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for doing this.
Thank you very much for organizing this. I think this is a bit of a boost to all our egos sitting here, because it's not every day that you actually think about what you achieve and how you do things. And that I think goes for both men and women. I would like to just say a couple of words about the international environment before I enter into Sweden in my own career. And I think we should all keep in mind that diplomacy has traditionally and formally been an area reserved to men. And only in the 1920s did states and international organizations open up to women. And a century later, today, men are still overrepresented. 85% of the world's ambassadors today are men. And men usually get more prestigious posts in countries with more important military and economic power. I'm speaking generally, not about other countries. And the efforts to gender equality in the diplomatic field grew particularly strong in the 1990s by a coalition of states, NGOs, and international organizations. And it became a wider concern for peace and security. And in 2000, the United Nations Security Council adopted Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. And this resolution became an integral part of the foreign policy of Sweden, Norway, Canada, and Australia. And the Swedish government in 2014 was the first government who adopted a feminist foreign policy. Now, in Sweden, women entered the diplomatic career fairly late. In the 1940s, women started being appointed as ambassadors, but it was first in 1948 that the first woman was actually accepted into the diplomatic training school. And it was also in Sweden, like in the UK in the beginning of the 70s, when they lifted the restriction for diplomats to be married. Today, almost 50% of the managerial posts in the foreign ministry are filled by women. And the goal of Swedish gender equality policy is that men and women should have the same power to shape society and their own lives. And this is, I think, important to remember that it's not a sheer goal in itself. It is about democracy and justice. And if we are going to solve the challenges that our society faces today, we have to integrate both sexes. And we have, Sweden is very often mentioned because Sweden tops scores the top positions in the EU on gender equality, and we show the highest female labor market participation and the highest share of women in political decision-making positions. And now, how did this happen? I would just like to mention 3 key reforms which, of course, lay the basis for where I am today. And the first one is the decision to let men and women hand in a separate income taxation in 1971 for wife and husband. This pushed a lot of women to enter working life. And also the introduction of public childcare and the gender-neutral paid parental leave. Those were also reforms introduced in the 70s. And I would say that Swedish politicians, both men and women, because many men are actively pursuing feminist or gender equality, they call themselves feminists. I see that we would need some more feminists in the audience. But it's very important that you lead by setting example. And you need to be courageous. And I think politicians are the ones who need to take the first step and set an example in society. And gender policy is an integral policy for the whole government. It involves really all the ministries at all the policy levels. And what has proved very efficient in Sweden is to have a gender mainstreaming and a gender responsive budgeting, because you have to look at where you put the money. It is very simple. You have to look at, for instance, how do we distribute the money in a municipality? Do we invest more in the ice hockey field and the football field, and don't we invest in the sports that girls usually pursue? So this is just a very basic example to show you what it's all about, but of course it trickles down into all the policy areas. So, needless to say, all this has laid the basis for my own career. I grew up in the 70s, and in the 70s there was a very strong push for women in the Swedish society and to offer equal opportunities to everybody. It was never a question of being boy and girl and who should succeed and who should get the possibilities to flourish and develop. Also, for me, ministers and female colleagues have been very important. We have had 6 foreign ministers. When I entered the foreign ministry, Anna Lindh was the foreign minister. And I remember I was really, even if it was at the end of the 90s, I often found myself in situations where I was the only woman. And I remember coming into the weekly briefing with her, and I was always the last one to enter because I was the youngest. And then she said to the men, well, please make some room for the young colleague. And she also introduced lunches for the women ambassadors and to try to boost women in the foreign ministry. And also colleagues who have been successful and becoming ambassadors are of course a very important example. When I entered the foreign ministry in 1999, in the interview they asked me, where would you like to be in 10 years? And I said, oh, I would be very happy if I was head of unit. It never ever crossed my mind that maybe one day I would be an ambassador. It was not, I didn't enter the foreign ministry because I wanted to become an ambassador, but of course as you move along and you see how nice the work is and what the opportunities are out there, of course you want to strive for becoming an ambassador. And I also believe it's very important to network. I have consciously supported many young colleagues in the ministry, and I'm so happy now that I see them at good positions and they are advancing. Now, since I've served in both Stockholm and also internationally, I can say that the headquarter offers a more gender equality basis for work, because we try to, in the foreign ministry, to create an environment both for men and women which respect the work-life balance. And what is very positive in our foreign ministry is that it doesn't matter if you hire a man or a woman, because you know the man is also going to be away 6 months on paternity leave. And you also know that when the kids are sick, the man will also go home. This creates a good environment because everybody respects it. In the beginning, when I started the ministry, there were, oh, that's a very good father because look, he's actually going home to take care about his kids, and that remark could be done, but that remark is not done any longer. And also we adopt flexible working hours. We never convene a meeting after 3 o'clock because we know that people have work to do, you need to get home, you need to wrap up stuff for the day. And of course, everybody with a portable computer, needless to say, you start working in the evening when the kids have gone to bed. I have often been torn between choices. What should I do with my professional career? How do I reconcile this with being a mother? I'm divorced. I wouldn't say that I'm divorced because of my job, because in Sweden there are many divorces. But of course, this idea goes into your mind because you travel, you change country, you are flexible, and you cannot be sure that the partner you're with is going to be equally flexible. And my new husband is working in Brussels, so we are commuting. It's not an ideal situation, but I think if you're in a modern couple, if you have more or less grown-up children, the man needs to support also the woman making her own decision and pursuing her own career. And I can say that I was raised with a grandmother who always told me, whatever you do in life, get a good education and see to it that you are economically independent. And that has, of course, helped me. When you start hearing these things when you're 5 years old, you think there must be some truth in it. Working in the European Union, yes, that's a big difference, working in the institutions, because it's a very male-dominated area, particularly when I worked on issues related to security, Russia and Ukraine. I was almost in 90% of the cases the only woman in the room. But I never experienced there, nor in the Swedish administration, any disadvantage being a woman. Of course, sometimes there is a bit this perception. People can say that a woman is bossy, but if it was a man, they would say, oh, he has great leadership qualities. But I think also women can do a lot of work as regards perception, because when these comments come, you can make a remark, or you can also, you must react. And I don't, like Kate, I don't think that I have a different leadership style than a man. And I think women should not even try to adopt a leadership style that could be perceived as masculine. I think my advice would be just be yourself and have a clear goal of where you want to go, and try to take all the opportunities that arise. And I wish you good luck in your further endeavors and careers, and I'm very happy to have been asked to come here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Salvador. I just realized, by being Greek and not Swedish, I've lost 2 paternity leaves. So if the college owes me 2 paternity leaves. I also have to add that in this room at least, the percentage of male ambassadors has dropped down to 15%. We only have 1 ambassador. Okay, I'd like to invite Ambassador Shamajan and Nikitas Marinos, who is a second-year student of computer science at the Athens University of Economics and Business. He's also a second-year student at Deree doing a parallel major in marketing and full scholarship. Will present the ambassador.
Thank you very much, Professor. Her Excellency the Ambassador of India to Greece, Shamajan, a career diplomat, assumed charge in Athens in December 2017. Her last assignment was as Ambassador of India to Panama from 2014 to 2017, with concurrent accreditation to Nicaragua and Costa Rica. She has also served as Ambassador to Côte d'Ivoire from 2008 to 2011, with concurrent accreditation to Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea. Earlier, she worked at the Ministry of External Affairs, New Delhi, as Joint Secretary in the Policy Planning and Counter-Terrorism Division, followed by a stint at the Indian Council of World Affairs, Delhi, one of the oldest think tanks in India, declared as an institution of national importance by the Indian Parliament. She has also worked as Director in the Division of South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation at the Ministry. She has served in the Indian missions in different capacities, including as the Deputy Chief of Mission in Italy, Minister in the Philippines, and Political Counselor in Washington, D.C. She has also held diplomatic assignments in Turkey, at the Permanent Delegation of India to UNESCO Paris, and in Argentina. She holds a double Master's in International Politics from Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi. She was awarded an honorary doctorate, honoris causa, by the former President of Liberia, Nobel laureate Miss Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, for her contribution to the promotion of India-Liberia relations. Your Excellency, welcome.
Dr. Horner, President of the American College of Greece, Ms. Garivis, Vice President of Public Affairs, faculty members, my diplomatic colleagues, and young students. It's a great honor and pleasure to be here this afternoon. What you see here, the 4 women diplomats, women ambassadors, in fact, ambassadorship is the acme of our diplomatic careers. It's a long journey which brings you finally to the getting appointed as an ambassador. Now, if I have to take you through my 35-year long diplomatic journey, I would need at least 35 minutes. But since I have to sum it up, I'll just give you some vignettes of my diplomatic life with the idea that diplomacy is like any other job, but it has some distinct challenges because you're always on the move. And you represent, as my colleague said, not only yourself or an organization, but your entire country. So the responsibilities can be burdensome, and it's always, you have to be diplomatic, but also in a fast-changing world. The paradigm has shifted of international diplomacy. Foreign policy is fluid around you. Contemporary challenges are totally unprecedented. So it's a very different world. What we learned years back has changed dramatically. So as a woman, sometimes those challenges can be even more daunting. But I would love to interact with you if there are any questions or something that I will just quickly point out a few things. Well, my idea of becoming an ambassador. You know, you young girls, you might be thinking of different careers. Why not think of being an ambassador? Nobody thinks of diplomatic career, one thinks of being an ambassador. I came from a small town in Jammu and Kashmir, and I think the seeds were sown by my dad. I was very young, in class 4th. We were made to write a composition, My Ambition. Everybody did that. And you could buy books in the market, and then you get the written essays, and you just copy that and you put that up to your teacher. So most of the women, for women it was a nurse, a teacher. For guys it was always doctor and engineer, and nothing beyond that. So I asked my dad, what do I want to become? He said, what do you want to become? I said, not a teacher, definitely not a nurse. So he said, well, you can be an ambassador. So that's how the journey began. Then I asked him what that means. And believe me, I really wanted to be an ambassador. When I was in school, when I was in college, and I went to university, I joined the School of International Studies at Montenegro University, and the idea was to become an ambassador, where the journey began. And so did the challenges. Well, it was not difficult because India has had a long and strong tradition of women in positions of power. Way back we became independent in 1947, and way back in 1949, first woman who broke the glass ceiling was a woman called Muthama. She came from the south of India, and she cleared the public service, Union Public Service exam. That's very challenging in India. It's when I joined the Foreign Service, or when I thought of joining the Foreign Service, there was no glass ceiling as such, but it's the intimidating exam that you have to pass. It takes 1 year, and when I did that in 1983, I began in 1982, there were 250,000 students. We are a population of 1.3 billion, so imagine the sheer numbers. Coming from a small state, and there were only 12 seats in Foreign Service, and 2 were positive discrimination, or was the word affirmative action, and 1 was another affirmative action, so there were 9 seats. And well, we were 2 women and 9 guys, the rest chosen, a total of 12, 10 guys and 2 women. And now when I look at the Foreign Service, in a group of 25, there are at least about 12 women. Things have changed radically. The Foreign Minister of India is a woman, the Defense Minister of India is a woman. Way back in the 60s and 70s, we had Mrs. Indira Gandhi, quite a formidable name. We've had the President of India as a woman. But when you're working in an institution, in a career where men are in majority, at times you think, oh, maybe I would have gotten a better posting, or my boss would have been more understanding if I had a woman ambassador. It does make a difference. You know, when I do my job, gender makes no difference. In fact, as a woman, instinctively, you tend to take upon yourself more responsibilities. And happily you do your work, and you feel responsible not only for yourself, for your colleagues, and continuing assuming responsibilities, and you want to do your very best. But there are challenges. There are times when you have a career and you also have your family, and the burden is on you. Traditionally, that's how it was in India. Things are changing radically, as I say. So it's been a very interesting journey, because I think the joys of being a diplomat compensated some inconveniences and moving around with a child from country to country. And the day you land up in a country, next day your job starts. Papers start piling up on your table. While your child, you have to put him to school, you have to open your bags, and everything is your job. That you do at night, and morning time you work in office. So I think one got used to it, but at multilateral institutions, the real job starts after the meetings get over. When I worked at UNESCO, it would be at 7 o'clock that your various working groups get over, and then you go to your office and you start working. So, well, but I think those challenges, I think that's what makes women more empathetic. Because you do, at least I feel that as a woman diplomat, wherever I went, whenever there was any event concerning women, I would make it a point to be there. Because in a way I was thinking that I'm being empathetic. I appreciate what it takes a woman to be there. It takes a village for a child, but it takes the entire ecosystem for a woman to succeed. So all that is very important. But quickly, I think a very challenging time I had. I've always enjoyed being a diplomat, challenges and all that. But when I was in Côte d'Ivoire, I lived during a civil war. And as a citizen of the world, at times I think I have to think beyond being a diplomat. I felt honestly, because we saw the crisis brewing and coming to a head, and I, and along with 3 other women ambassadors, I would not name them because it gets politicized, we all felt very strongly about the need to avoid the conflict, whether it was party A or party B. We felt that lives, precious lives, were really at risk, and that's, as women, as citizens of the world, we should do something about that. But of course, that's the time, and also India was a temporary, a member of the Security Council just for a short term, so we gained insights into how important issues of peace and war are decided in the Security Council. And as a woman diplomat, I really feel that the world would be different if there were many more women in positions of authority. If there were, let's say, a woman Secretary General of UN, many more women in those important positions where you decide on issues of war, peace, conflict resolution. As a woman, I think your experience as a mother, as a caretaker, or as a person who nourishes is important, and I think that leaves an imprint. That's the impression I carried when I was in Ivory Coast. But well, I would also say that in our foreign service now, there are many more women ambassadors. The challenge was in the initial years, not there was a glass ceiling, but not too many women took the exam, because your 1 full year is gone and then you could be back to square one. So while your parents are pushing you to produce some results or to get married, and you want to take up this challenge. But now many more women are joining in the foreign service, and once you're in the service, I think discriminatory practices are becoming lesser and lesser, because many more women are in administration. We've had foreign secretaries as women, as I said, external affairs ministers, a woman at present. So definitely makes a change. But one thing which I felt very strongly about when I joined the foreign service, on a personal note, one challenge was always ironing my 5.5 meters of Indian cloth. Being a representative of India, it's a formidable task. 5.5 meters, you're always ironing. But well, the compliments you get will sometimes make up for that. But I always thought, why have these men made these rules? A national code is national dress for women, which is sari, or regional attire, which is more comfortable. But for men, it's not the Indian traditional dhoti 8 meters. it's the suits they wear. No, we women have protested about it because when you're in a country snowbound and you're wearing your sari, your heels, you think it's a very practical problem. So, and I see the young generation, now rules have not been changed, but women say, let's see who defies us. And I see young girls wearing pants, wearing suits, and nobody blinks any longer. So that's the change. But I would love to interact with you. Any questions or thank you so much for this initiative.
Well, last but not least, will be the ambassador of Australia, Kate Logan. I just have to add that the ambassadors speak in order by which they have presented their credentials to the President of the Hellenic Republic. So, you know, we chose the order was not accidental. Okay? I invite Meletios Flavarakis in his third year studying information technology at Deree, while also doing 2 minors in finance and philosophy, to present the Ambassador of Australia.
Thank you for the introduction, Doctor. Her Excellency, Ambassador of Australia, Kate Logan, is a senior career officer with the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. She was most recently Assistant Secretary of the Executive Branch, supporting ministers and the Secretary in leadership and management of the department. Ms. Logan was Assistant Secretary of the Papua New Guinea and Fiji branch between 2012 and 2016, with responsibility for managing Australia's political and economic relations with those countries. She was advisor to the Minister of Foreign Affairs from 2005 to 2007, with responsibility for South and Southeast Asia and terrorism issues. Ms. Logan's roles in the department include Director of the Pakistan section, Director of the Counter-Terrorism section, and Executive Officer in the Arms Control and Western Europe branches. Overseas, Ms. Logan has served as a Councillor and Head of the Political Section at the Australian Embassy in Paris, Deputy Head of Mission at the Australian High Commission in Colombo, and First Secretary at the Australian Embassy in Athens. She holds a Bachelor of Laws with honours, major in International Law, and a Bachelor of Arts with honours from the University of Melbourne, and a graduate diploma in Foreign Affairs and Trade from the Australian National University. Ms. Ambassador, thank you for coming.
Thanks very much. It really struck me when I became an ambassador that diplomacy really is a male-dominated profession. And this is brought home to me when I meet people here that sometimes think I'm the wife of somebody important, or say very nicely, oh, you're the ambassador. And I now answer, were you expecting somebody else? And they answer quite objectively, I think, is yes. The figures bear this out. Charlotte's already given you the ambassador figure, but women make up 23% of parliamentarians around the world, 27% of judges, and 15% of corporate board members. In Australia, in my own Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, we've had 50% female recruitment for decades, an active women in leadership strategy for the last 10 years, and still only 37% of our ambassadors are women. So this stuff is not easy, but as I look at all of you here, I see a whole lot of clever young people about to embark on a career of your own, whether it be in diplomacy or another facet of public life. And I'm thinking you don't actually need to hear about the barriers to women participating in those professions. I'm thinking you want to hear about how it can be done and how you can make it work. I don't have all the answers, and you will find your own better answers along the way. But I wanted to give you some of the things that I have found useful. I'll call on my 10 practical tips for women in diplomacy. Number 1, find and meet and read about as many role models as you can. If you want to work in diplomacy or international security or defence, find out about women who work in those fields. Because the more women that you see and know about in these roles, I think the more routine it will become for you and for other women to take them up. And eventually they will be seen less and less through the prism of gender. New Zealand is on its third female Prime Minister, and I'm pretty sure people don't refer to Jacinda Ardern as a female leader anymore. Australia is on its second female Foreign Minister, and when she was appointed a few months ago, her gender was barely mentioned. For people your age in Australia, actually, I'm not even sure they remember a male Foreign Minister. So over time, I think women's participation in these public roles just becomes normalised. Number 2, don't feel out of place when in a professional context you walk into a room of men. It's hard, it happens all the time, and I feel that way often. The imposter syndrome, call it what you like, but try to think of it as your enabling factor rather than a hindrance. Turn it around like this. You will stand out. You won't be one of the million men in a blue suit. People will notice you and come and speak to you, and that's what you want. You'll be better able to develop deeper relationships with senior female contacts, senior women in your countries of accreditation. And even in conservative international environments, it can be done. We now have women ambassadors in Kabul and Baghdad, and this can be uniquely useful for their visibility as role models in their own right. Number 3, don't believe a word of it when people tell you that you can't have a career in diplomacy and have a family. It's nonsense. You will make choices like everybody else, but they will be your choices. And you will make your own way. You will juggle, you will compromise, but remember that everything is doable. Which brings me to 4. Don't beat yourself up over little things that you miss. You may not always do everything perfectly, and I can bore you endlessly with stories about the number of times I've missed dress-up day at my little boy's school, or sent him off in the same shirt 2 days running, but you know, no one remembers, and they love you just the same. Number 5, call out bias when you see it. Make people aware of what they're doing or what they're saying. Educate them about the benefits of what you're seeking to do or change. I don't mean in an aggressive way or in an overly assertive way. I'm talking about encouraging people to see that the view they hold is actually unfounded or not going to lead to a better outcome. Slowly you can change attitudes. Deploy humour. Deploy charm, use evidence, marshal your arguments. It's called diplomacy. Related to this is 6. Know that every single empirical study shows that diverse teams make better decisions. The more perspectives and ideas that you build into your decision making, the more sound and robust the outcome is going to be. Just ask the private sector. A well-known recent study in Australia found that companies with a gender balance on their boards and in senior management produce stronger results and higher profits. Case closed. So if you can't persuade people on logic and equality grounds that more women in public life is a good idea, persuade them on productivity and profit grounds. Number 7. Number 7. Bring influential men on board to support you. In Australia, we have a program called Male Champions of Change, which essentially brings male CEOs and heads of department on board to embrace strategies that support women. Because the reality is that unless senior men own it and defend it, it's probably not going to happen. And to the young men here, starting out on careers soon, I would say, you know where this thing is headed. It's no longer feasible to exclude 50% of the population from leadership positions in any field. So get on board early, own the change, and be recognised for it in a positive way. Which brings me to 8. What a previous Australian Foreign Minister called having a secret plan. When Julie Bishop was one of only 2 female cabinet ministers in a not very far away government 5 years ago, she and her colleague, her other female colleague, hatched a plan to speak up in support of what the other one had said in cabinet meetings. Because you know how annoying it is when you're in a meeting and you make a suggestion and no one reacts. And then 5 minutes later a man makes the same suggestion and everyone says, that's genius. So the next time you're in a group and another woman makes a good suggestion, you know what to do. Number 9. A little shout out to people here that organise panels or participate in panels. Please don't have manels. We're doing okay today, but try and give your panels a balance of male and female voices, because if people see women speaking publicly and confidently and with authority, then that is how they will regard them. Number 10. Last of all, I say to you, don't be spooked. One thing this job has taught me is that there's more than one way of doing things. It doesn't have to be the old-fashioned way. In diplomacy, it doesn't have to be about sending formal notes verbal or doing things in strict protocol order, whatever it is. There are new and different ways. And when I stand behind the Australian flag at events, and when I'm represented at different times by an Australian Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, Chief Justice, Governor General, I'm proud, because it shows a modern image of my country, a way of doing things that is agile and innovative and more forward-looking. It's like the ultimate in soft power diplomacy for my country. So my message to you is go for it.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm wondering whether I should actually ask a question or not as being the main panel. But I just want to say something very quickly, that from the comments made by you and the ambassadors of United Kingdom and Sweden, one would probably have expected countries with strong democratic traditions and strong institutions, obviously to allow women to reach the top. But on the other hand, when the ambassador of India spoke, it reminded us that India had a woman prime minister, Indira Gandhi, and I was thinking of Pakistan and Venezuela. I was wondering that in Greece, we never had a woman prime minister. And the great wonder is that America, which has the strongest constitution and very strong position, hasn't had yet a woman president, although the head of the House is a woman. And so even in countries where you have very strong institutions, sometimes it's very, very difficult to reach the top. Now we'd like to open the discussion to the floor. I would encourage students, because this is mostly for students, to raise some questions. It's a rare opportunity. Here we have 4 ambassadors women. So, yes. Do we have a microphone to go around? Yeah.
Hello. Thank you so much for coming here today. My name is Sophia Zuanich. I'm a communication major student. This is my 3rd year. I'm the president of the Communication Society as well. What I wanted to ask is actually Ms. Kate Smith, kind of related to what Dr. Vlavianos just said. I really liked what you mentioned about the strength of institutions, and I feel very fortunate myself to not have faced any, sort of mistreatment or disadvantage, at least not that I can perceive. What I wanted to ask is if there's a situation where the institution is strong, as in it's strong for gender equality, it's strong for equal opportunity stuff, and this discrepancy still exists, is it the responsibility of the institution to ensure that men and women numerically are equally represented, or is it a societal issue where we're not encouraging women to pursue these sort of positions enough?
That's on? Yeah. Thank you for your question. I think the answer's got to be both. I think society sets the framework, and I think something of what I was trying to describe about legislation and social policy, that sets the framework for greater participation. But the institutions themselves have to make changes as well in order to make it easier and more attractive for women to want to take on those leadership roles. But I think we also have to think that sometimes, ultimately, there are life choices and life decisions that people make independently, and that can mean that we will really struggle maybe to get to that 50-50 of all ambassadorships. I think we'll get there at some point. But what I mean is, I think so long as the institutions and society are doing the right things, we shouldn't beat ourselves up too much if we're not at the 50% right now, as long as the trend is correct. I think that's the important thing.
Somebody else? Yeah.
Hello, my name is Anastasia. I'm a law graduate, and I'm studying, doing a minor degree in international business here at Deree. Thank you all for being here. It's an amazing opportunity for all of us, especially for some of us that want to work in public service. My question is, it goes to everyone. I totally agree about the importance of the institutional strength. But with regard to countries that do not have a strong tradition of women being in a position of power, how do you bring about institutional change? Do you have to change the society first, or do you have to change the way the institutions work?
I think that question it's a very fundamental question, and that involves society building, nation building, institutions, democratic setup, and all that. It's not only for a woman diplomat to address that, but that would be a challenge for a society. But I mean, I think it's nation building basically. Nation building is about institutions, and when you build institutions, 50% of the population has to be co-opted. You cannot leave them out. But the most important thing is really society to advance is women's education. I've seen in my country with so many challenges when we became independent in 1947. It's something which has been empowering, which has empowered women. Because it's a huge population I'm talking about, just giving you the example of my own country, 1.3 billion people. So now when you see young women in villages, young girls, everybody wants to study education. So that's, I think, a primary key, because that empowers women, that gives them it. And once you have economic freedom, you're economically independent. That's really crucial. All that you need education. An educated woman is empowered, she's enlightened. And an educated woman can enlighten her family, her entire family. An educated woman brings in much more change in a family than an educated man. We all know that. So a woman catalyzes change. Educated women, and that's a very strong institution really.
I think Shana's given a great macro answer. What I would add is the point I made about normalising roles, I think, where, if you have a trailblazer that fills a position for the first time, I think it's very hard for that person, that woman that we're talking about. I think for the person that follows them into that job, it's much easier the second time around. So, the challenge is to find that first person to fill the position so that people just stop talking about it in that way, and it becomes a normal phenomenon. And then I think, you're on the roll.
Several times I got the question, but here in Greece it's different, and you may be performing as you do up there in the north, but the mentality here is different. And then I actually spoke to a Swedish politician who has been advocating gender equality for many years. And I said to her, is this true? Do we have a different mentality? And she said, no. In the 60s, it was very tough in Sweden. And the only way to bring about a change, at least in our experience, was to have courageous politicians advocating gender equality and leading by example. But this is what I took from that discussion, and I do think it's very important. And I also remember when we spoke with Deree's conference, and I think they have to start in their own parties first. And I think I said this on other occasions as well. If you really want to bring about a change in Greece, you have to demand from your politicians that they start in their own organization.
I think because students have a class at 3:05, perhaps one very quick question. If there is no question, Yes, please. Julius. That's the last question.
First of all, thank you very much for your speech. I'd just like to quickly ask whether all the ambassadors feel that despite the increasing opportunities that we see women in power, whether at the end of it, the jobs are being maybe more harshly assessed. And I take this with the example of recently the Brazilian president, first Brazilian female president, Dilma Rousseff, who was deposed by impeachment, and whose case I feel a lot of her criticism also came because she was the first Brazilian female president.
Does anyone in the ambassador want to address that question? Well, Julius, I just said, if you have equal rights, you can have criminals on both sides of the sexes. I mean, she might have been guilty of what she was accused with Petrobras. And it's irrespective of whether she was a woman or a man. But anyway, anyone would like to? There's one more question. Far right. Last question.
Thank you very much for all of you. Such great speeches. I was actually flattered when I heard that there's a paternity leave for men as well. Very encouraging. I actually wanted to...
You can get it. I lost it.
I'm India, yeah. Well, my name is Deree Noazi. I'm double majoring in philosophy and international relations, minoring in IT. And to me it's interesting because I always stress on merit-based, and I could not care less. If it's merit-based, it could be 70% more in women, and I would still be fine with it. So I say that, okay, institutionally, it should be okay, it should be fine. Women should have the right, without any obstacles, to go up there, but socially, culturally, socioeconomically speaking, women, how will you go about encouraging them? Because you might have the right institution, but women may not voluntarily go there. So I want to ask if there's already organizations, projects, initiatives going on about this, and I'm curious about that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Well, the Indian ambassador just said something about education, which was very important. I wonder if any of the other ambassadors would like to.
Yes. In answer to your question, yes, there are lots of programs. I mean, part of the challenge is the kind of behind the figures work that's going on, certainly in my country, where, you know, yes, you have seen lower numbers of women applying for senior positions, and there's some great work that's gone on to find some statistics about job applications and how, you know, there's this phenomenon of, you know, you'll get 6 criteria for a job and men will apply when they meet 3 or 4 of the criteria. Women will only apply when they meet all of them. And that goes on everywhere. So in my department and in my government, we've been working to encourage women to apply more for those positions so that it's a bigger pool. And I think that's part of answering your question.
Yeah, thank you. I want to answer actually referring to comments that Charlotte and Shana both made in their presentations, because they both talked about influences on them at a very, very early age. Shana talked about her father suggesting that she become ambassador, and you talked about your grandmother, I think, saying that you should be economically independent. I think, like education, you have to start with this at a really early formative stage in a girl's life. So I think the message I would say is all those of you who are or will be in the situation of bringing up children or nurturing girls at an early stage in their life, never ever give a girl an impression that she's different or that she'll be treated differently or it's going to be harder for her, because that's what will put girls off at an early stage. I never had that from my parents as well. There was never just a scintilla, an iota of suggestion that I couldn't do what I wanted to do just as well as my brother. So I think that's really important at that early stage in the home environment. Of course, we all know girls and boys still get born a bit different and like to play with different toys. Decades of social policy haven't really changed that, you know. but in the attitudes of those who are looking after them and are responsible for supporting, encouraging them, I think it's really important that that message is sent out loud and clear at a very early age.
Thank you very much. I think.
You have time for one more question?
Are you okay? Yeah. The students are okay. You can stay here, yeah, forever. Okay. One more question. The lady there.
Hello, thank you all for being here. I'd like to go back to the question of my fellow audience member. Do you as women, one by one, let's forget the Brazilian president, believe that your work has been more harshly judged just because you're women? And other than that, a second part of my question, do you believe affirmative action is relevant in any job nowadays? Do you know that based on meritocracy, women need affirmative action to be hired in jobs? Thank you.
Affirmative action, I would say, in certain societies, yes, because women have traditionally been deprived of their rights, and that's almost like universal truth, even in the most advanced countries, and they're also discriminated against. I would not like to bring in other issues, but you know about this Me Too movement that started in the US, you know how much ugliness has happened, how women have been devastated, and yes, that's happening in India too. Many women from the press, from Bollywood, they're coming out. It's their voice. Women have traditionally been discriminated against. We all know that. So affirmative action, I would say yes, because for a woman to encourage a woman to come up to a certain level where she even applies for a job in traditional societies, that means you have to empower her. As I said, she would need an ecosystem. I would not say that this affirmative action should continue where a level playing field has been provided to young girls, students, and those societies. Yet at the same time, there are many societies where women have been deprived, and it continues. Take about literacy rates across the world. In most of the countries, there's a different literacy rate for women and for men. How many women are there in the boardrooms today? Look around. They'll give you the answer. See, that's 50% of the population. So why isn't it the same for them? It's very obvious that to encourage more women, for example, also in boardrooms, why not? In my country also now it's a rule that I think it's not mandatory yet, or perhaps that at least a certain percentage of boardroom members or directors in any board of directors should be women. Because I think it's also advantageous. It makes so much of sense because 50% of the population will be well represented when you have a woman. Decision making would be more sound. So even to have better policies, it's not even discrimination, it's to have better outcomes, but you need to have 50% of the population on board. And to facilitate that in traditional societies, why not make it easier for them? And if it's affirmative action, yes.
If I look at the Swedish Foreign Ministry, I don't think we need affirmative action because in fact what's happening now is that more women are applying to enter the foreign service and they are generally better. But in order to ensure that there is equality in the ministry, I think we are now actually having affirmative actions to take in younger men. I cannot, to my knowledge, say that I've been judged more harshly than a man in any situation. Maybe I have, but I haven't noticed in that case.
I just want to add that as the Ambassador Kate Smith was saying, I just read in The Guardian last week that one of the famous British actors, one in, not Kate Winslet, Keira Knightley, has forbidden her daughter from watching certain Disney films, like Snow White and Sleeping Beauty, because these films reaffirm the role, that women from the early age, have to see themselves as waiting for the prince to come and all that. I don't know what's your view of that, but anyway, she had very firm views on how you educate a child from a very young age. And so in the house, these Disney films are not allowed. Would you agree with that when you say early age? That's, anyway, we can discuss why. Yeah, okay. Well, thank you so much. Claudia would like to say something just before we close.
Thank you all very much for your coming, for joining us, and for your attention. I would like to specifically thank our students, Nicolas, Panayotis, Maletis, and Nikitas, for having us present to the ambassadors. We have, as a small token of appreciation, we have a small gift for you, but I would also like to take the opportunity to thank our Deree student ambassadors. This is how we call the very select group of Deree students who welcome you on campus. Eleni, Efterfi, and Mary. Thank you very much. I want to thank Hassan and people earlier for having us at the registration desk. So please present a small token of appreciation for your time and for your presentations. Thank you for joining us.